Most cyclists think that their legs or heart are their biggest limiter. But according to today's guest, Dr. Andrew Sellers, the real bottleneck is something you've probably never even trained before: your breathing. And the craziest part about this conversation is you can train this no problem at all sitting at home on your couch. This conversation blew my mind. It's Dr. Andrew Sellers. Dr. Andrew Sellers, welcome to the Roadmap Podcast.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
You're one of the pioneers of biomarker guided training, but can you give me a little bit about your background? When did you first become interested in respiratory performance from an athletic point of view?
This goes way back. So I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but I actually heard an 8-track audio cassette on yoga breathing when I was a swim coach in a northern town in British Columbia, Canada, where I was paying my way through university by swim coaching in the summers. And I was head coaching a fairly large team in a small town up north. And one of my athletes brought me these 8-track cassettes and said, "Can you tell me whether there's any validity to this? It seems like it's a smart idea, but I don't know what it's worth." And at the time I was studying physiology at university. So I had a bit of biomechanical background, a little bit of physiology training from university. And I listened to these 8-tracks, and the 8-tracks went through this idea of, they introduced nasal breathing, and they introduced the idea of slow breathing during running. And I was at the time a budding triathlete. I was 19 years old, and it was just at the early wave of triathlon. This is back in 1989, 1990. And I started this slow breathing running training. And initially I could only jog. I could barely go from a walk to a jog without increasing my breathing rate. And the whole pattern of the 8-tracks was to slow your breathing down and see how fast you could get with slow breathing. And over this course of 6 weeks, I went from being able to run, at the time, 6.5 minute kilometers to just over a 4-minute kilometer pace, maintaining the same slow breathing pattern. And I just thought, this is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. I went back to the girl who brought me the tapes. I said, "I have no idea how this is going to affect us in swimming, where we have time limited space in swimming to breathe, but let's play around with it." So we actually started doing some slow swim training with slow breathing patterns and incorporated into our training with the team, with some really good success there too. But the impact of the understanding of what was going on in my brain came years later. But that was the initiative. If you ask where it started when I was 19 years old in a little northern town in Quesnel.
And it was funny because before podcasts, I'll often go and ride the bike, and I'll have researched the guest. And most times when I go ride the bike, I'll end up asking a totally different set of questions than the basis of my research, because it's true lived experience. And I had one of these type experiences today. I'm using TimeWare. You know what this is? It's the new respiratory device.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky enough to get one of the first units that haven't gone to the team. So I'm using TimeWare, and my phone is crudely mounted on my handlebars because they haven't integrated with Hammerhead yet. So I'm just using the TimeWare app. One of the first things that I've noticed with it is, when I was eating, I'm trying to fuel at like 80 grams of carbohydrates per hour for this session. I've been doing it almost exclusively off Haribo jellies. Haribo jellies, it turns out, are quite hypoxic in nature because when I take the Haribo jellies, my breathing rate totally changes. Yeah. And with that, my rate of perceived exertion changes. And I was like, This is very interesting. I need to dig into this today with Dr. Sellers to see what's actually happening here.
There's a few things that could be happening. So just for those that don't know, the TimeWare is a shirt that you can wear that actually measures your breathing pattern. And it's actually quite good at measuring the respiratory frequency, and it gives a pretty good idea of volumes of breath. It's not extremely accurate, but it's really good at showing patterns of breathing. And being aware of your breathing is the first step in understanding how you can train it and how you can actually use it in in performance improvements and actually adjust. We can talk about that later, but how you can adjust your breathing to improve performance. But the interesting thing about the Haribo, I heard a podcast that you mentioned it, and we were talking about the carbs, and I've been using it for years when we ride in Mallorca and things, because it's an easy snack that you can pick up at almost virtually any store. And anyway, so I've been using Haribo for years unofficially, and now I actually always carry a small bag with me on top of my regular fuel to get me through usually the last hour of a long ride. But
so where's the thread from your first awareness where you get these cassette tapes and you realize, okay, there might be something here, to now when you get to interact with some of the top performers in the world? Like, when did you start to see the patterns that made you zero your research into the breath?
Yeah, so remember, I'm old, so I have so many stories, and I'll go down rabbit holes. But in this little town up north, there also happened to live the smartest physiologist that I've ever met. His name is Jörg Feldman, and he became a mentor of mine just through happenstance. He was just a brilliant Swiss physiologist who was involved with some of the original sports schools in Switzerland, and moved to Quesnel, this little town, to really get away from the big city and the drive that was happening in Europe. And he just wanted to move to a small town and live on a lake and raise his family. And he ended up coaching some of the best Canadian cyclists of all time. And he was actively involved with Ryder Hesjedal and Jeff Kabush, who are the two winningest Canadian cyclists. And
Giro d'Italia in 2012, 2011 for a rider.
Yeah. And Jeff Kabush is still riding and still racing gravel races and mountain bike races around North America. And both of them were the two top Canadian mountain bikers at the time when he coached them. He was coaching them when they were youths up through their development years, before they turned pro. And he was living in this little town, and we started talking. I met him at the pool one day, and he was just sharing crazy, at the time, seemed like crazy ideas. At the time, he was developing new lactate testing protocols and developed a protocol that revolutionized lactate testing. And a few years later, when I went back to Quesnel, and I went back to spend time with him while I was doing my medical degree, so that I had some time, I used it as an excuse. We had to do a rural placement in medicine. And I said, well, I'd like to go up to Quesnel. And the med school said, sure, it's a great place to go. There's good opportunities for rural medicine up there. And I didn't tell them. The main reason I wanted to go was to spend time with a physiologist who was brilliant. And so as I got there, he brought me this device, which was the first respiratory training device that had come on the market from Switzerland, called the Respirator, which was developed by his old schoolmates. And this is all small world stuff. And he said, Andrew, I don't know if this works, but can you help me figure out whether this thing works or not? And I said, sure, what does it do? And he says, well, you rebreathe some CO2 and you can train your respiratory system. And I'm like, well, how do you balance your CO2 with it? And he said, I don't know, it's got a valve in it and it does all this crazy measurements. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand how that could work. So I took it into the operating room where I was working, and I hooked it up to our CO2 analyzer and our oxygen, and I put on a pulse oximeter. I started using this crazy breathing device, and it did exactly what it said it would do. It would manage your CO2 levels so that you would stay in a safe physiologic range. And when it went outside of those ranges, it would alarm. And I was like, well, I don't know how it's doing. I don't know how it's doing the math behind it, but that's why you pay a lot of money for this device, is because it has internal mechanisms that balances the CO2. And that was back in 1998, 99. And so we started doing respiratory training with Jörg Feldman, and he was instrumental in incorporating respiratory training with Jeff Kabush and Ryder Hesjedal when they were youths. And then it was the whole Swiss mountain biking team was using it because the device was Swiss and they were supporting the Swiss mountain biking team. And that was the time where they had 8 team members from Switzerland who were in the top 10 in the world. They all happened to be doing respiratory training. And then the studies started to come out. And
so just to jump in and try and simplify this a little bit for someone that doesn't know what we're talking about, because if you're a cycling fan in the last few years, you may have heard respiration maybe from 2 different directions. You might have heard we had the carbon rebreather scandal with, I going to say UAE, Jumbo, and a bunch of other teams. I can't remember which teams were involved in that. And then it became nasal breathing became quite popular, I think, worldwide after James Nestor. He was on this podcast, but more famously on Joe Rogan's podcast and a bunch of others, wrote the amazing book, Breathe. Yeah. So given there are only 2 data points that most listeners have heard, like fill in the blank for me as to what we're actually talking about and how this can be a powerful tool for cyclists.
So this comes back to some of your Feldman's ideas, but the idea that the physiologic performance that you derive out of the bicycle requires a whole bunch of complex physiology to develop the power that you put into your legs. And so my approach to that is all of the systems that are required to improve performance can be separated. So you have a cardiac system, you have a respiratory system, you have a muscular system, you have a neurologic system, you have a psychologic system, you have a metabolic system. All of those systems contribute at some level to the absolute peak performance that you want, whether it's in a time trial or a road race or wherever. And any one of those factors can be a strength or a limitation to performance. So you imagine someone who has just broken their leg, they have a clear limitation in their musculoskeletal area. They can't ride a bike. And as they recover from that broken leg, they will slowly develop their leg strength back. They will develop the bone strength will knit over the next 6 weeks, and they will slowly develop the leg strength again that they lost in not being able to train for 6 weeks. And that's a perfect example of a musculoskeletal limitation that is really obvious to anybody who can see it. But the same limitation could happen in somebody who doesn't have the genetic factors of having really strong musculoskeletal system. And you can develop that cyclists develop that in a number of different ways, either with slow cadence or hill climbing or gym work, and they can overcome that musculoskeletal limitation. Likewise, you can have a cardiac limitation or a metabolic limitation, the inability to burn sugars fast enough to create the energy. And my theory, and it's been proven a number of times, you can also have a respiratory limitation. The respiratory is one of the key factors in driving oxygen from the lungs to the muscles where you need it. And you need to have the ability to pull oxygen out of the environment, out of the air, push it into the blood through the lungs, and then have it pumped by a really efficient cardiac system to the muscles where it can be pulled out of the blood into the muscles. You need a really good metabolic system then to make use of that oxygen to create the energy and the drive to be able to ride your bike really fast.
Yeah, that was a great explanation.
But without the rest,
to just jump in on that and ask one qualifying question on it.
Yep.
How would we baseline our respiratory rate now as a lay person, non-access to, the World Tour laboratories to figure out if it's a roadblock for us that's worth tackling?
Without testing equipment, it's not super easy. It's a little bit intuitive, and it takes a little bit of self-control, but it's the ability to actually count and assess how you're breathing at any given intensity. So everybody will breathe slower when they're at rest, and everybody will breathe faster as the higher intensity you go. And that is for 2 reasons. One that everybody knows about is to pull in more oxygen, to supply the muscles with oxygen, to burn as a fuel, as a assistance to the fuel burning of sugars and fats to create energy in the metabolic process. But the main reason you breathe faster with higher intensity exercise is to blow off CO2, which is a byproduct of metabolism. So the harder you work, the more CO2 you produce, the harder you have to breathe to blow it off.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So, yeah, and most people who aren't in physiology or aren't in medicine don't understand that the major driving force for you to breathe is CO2. That's why when you hold your breath, if you have a pulse oximeter on, which measures how much oxygen is in your blood, you can hold your breath for as long as you want. Your oxygen saturation won't drop, but you will have a desperate desire to breathe. And it's not because your oxygen level is dropping, it's because your CO2 level is climbing.
And is that the tingly feeling you experience? I've gone on some of these Wim Hof courses, and you'll do rounds of deep breathing, and then on the final round, you'll do a long breath hold. Yeah. And maybe the 4th or 5th time doing this, you start to get a little bit better through repetition at these breath holds. and you can get to a point where you start to get this very tingling sensation and your extremities get very cold. Is that CO2 buildup?
Uh, no, no, yes and no. So for the numerous athletes that you have that have followed Wim Hof, the physiology behind the over breathing is you're blowing off CO2. So you're taking your normal baseline, which is at rest and at most physiologic levels. Your CO2 is very tightly controlled. It's controlled between 35 and 45 millimeters of mercury biochemically, because anything outside of that range is physiologically maladaptive and causes problems in multiple systems. It causes problems in the heart system, the vascular system, and in the brain. So when you blow off CO2 more than your normal level, you become hypocapnic, low CO2 levels, and it allows you to hold your breath for much, much longer before the CO2 reaches a level that becomes uncomfortable. And when you blow it off, your body does a lot of things to try and save your vital organs. So it changes your vasculature, and that's the tingling you end up feeling is the changes in vasculature that are happening because of the changing CO2 levels. And in that particular example where you overbreathe dramatically and then hold your breath, you've gone from the very, very low CO2 levels by overbreathing it off to very, very high CO2s by doing a very long breath hold. So you've gone from vasoconstricting that happens with low CO2 to vasodilation that happens, which is increasing blood vessel and increasing blood flow to the extremities. And that's the tingling you're getting, is going from vasoconstriction to vasodilation and increasing blood flow to the periphery.
And as kind of a sidebar, how is Wim Hof, how's he received in the academic community?
I think it depends on who you're talking to. I mean, he's taken advantage of the dramatic importance of breathing and made it fun and interesting and dynamic and interesting. So I mean, he's using real physiologic things. He never talks about physiology. I mean, in any of his things, he doesn't talk about physiology. He just talks about the effects of breathing. And so for me, as someone who loves academics, I love the fact that he's got people thinking about their breathing. And so you can't argue with the fact that he has effects and it causes effects. He doesn't talk about why the physiology is there. And I love the fact that I understand the physiology behind what he's doing to explain why people have these outer body experiences.
I even got a kick out of listening to that. I'm like, I'm never going to do the Wim Hof app with the same framing again. I'm going to have a different understanding now next time I go back to it. It's a cool app, by the way, as well.
Yeah. And that's why I thought it's interesting you're talking about the book Breathe, and then the other one, the sort of companion book that is also worth a read is The Oxygen Advantage.
Yes, our author, actually, Patrick McKeown.
Yeah, but brilliant book, but it really should have been called The CO2 Advantage, the carbon dioxide advantage, because all of the entire book is about this understanding of what happens to your body with higher levels of CO2 and the physiologic benefits of higher levels of CO2 if you can tolerate it. And this is what we talk about when we talk about other ways of using your breathing to control carbon dioxide levels to improve performance.
So you developed a respirator muscle trainer with Luke Way.
Yes.
What is that?
So it's called a Breathe Way Better. Luke Way was originally an athlete that I helped out, was an Xterra athlete who came to Kelowna to coach with us. And we started a team called Balance Point Racing many years ago. And he came to coach with that team and was looking for something else to contribute to the world. And so he was kind enough to invite me to the initial conversations about how we could incorporate some of our coaching ideas into something more than just an online coaching business. And so there's three of us that co-founded the company. There's Luke, who's the coach and ideas guy. There's me, the physiologist, who helped sort of package it and help understand the physiology behind it. And there's an engineer named Alex who is brilliant and helped us develop the actual device to allow us to breathe and rebreathe CO2 in a balanced way that allows us to maintain normal physiologic pH. So you can do the over breathing like you do with Wim Hof without actually running into problems with low CO2 levels. and
Okay,
you can
very
do
interesting.
slow breathing with the big challenge of the respiratory training is you can only do it for long enough that you don't screw up your physiology. But if you rebreathe some CO2, you can balance your physiology, and now you can actually train your breathing for as long and hard as you want without actually negatively affecting your physiology and without having to drive the body to levels that would be really hard to mimic a race without riding really, really hard.
Roadman, whether you're a weekend warrior or a world tour rider, the right tools can make all the difference. Enter 4i's Precision 3 Plus Power Meter, the latest innovation from 4i, designed to help you reach peak performance. The Precision 3 Plus Power Meter is a compact yet powerful unit. It weighs just 9 grams and it's packed with features that set it apart, including integration with Apple's Find My network, giving you the peace of mind by letting you track your power meter wherever it is. Plus, you've got up to 800 hours of battery life. We all know that accuracy is key, and 4i's delivers a groundbreaking plus or minus 1% accuracy thanks to their unique 3D strain gauge technology. For those seeking even more data, the Precision 3 Plus Pro Power Meter offers dual-sided power meter metrics, giving you detailed insights into pedaling efficiency, torque effectiveness, and left-right balance. 4i's offers versatile product options to suit your needs. Choose from ride-ready power meters with pre-installed units on Shimano cranks, or up for factory-installed power meter, where you send in your crankset for a custom installation. Ready to elevate your cycling game? Trust 4i's Precision 3 Plus Power Meter. Precision, performance, and peace of mind all in one. Learn more by visiting 4iiii.com. That's 4iiii.com. I'm going to put that in the description down below. Yeah, I was going to say, because if you can compartmentalize it and separate it into, like you were saying, like the constituent parts, you can work just the breath. Like, I assume I can simulate the effect on my respiratory system of a threshold session, but while watching Netflix, I'm not moving at all from the couch.
Absolutely. And if your limitation is breathing, which it turns out that many athletes have a limitation in their breathing, they just don't know it. They can now train that at, like you say, at a threshold intensity without having to kill their legs or kill their cardiac system, so that they can actually go do a 6-hour ride the next day without actually having had any leg limitation or any cardiac limitation, and actually get the benefits of those on the long, easy ride with an easier breathing pattern. And I actually read I think I was hearing one of your podcasts about one of your favorite workouts is these 4-minute intervals that are up, like hill intervals.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Or they're 4 minutes of 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off.
Yeah, like a Tabata style effort.
Right. Yeah. And you could imitate that again, breathing. And one of the benefits of doing those really high intensity interval sessions is the fact that it drives your breathing. But when your breathing gives out, you won't be able to push as hard on the legs. And so now your performance will drop off because your breathing can't keep up. But you can train the breathing for 6 weeks and actually do better in that training session because your respiratory system is no longer the limitation.
We've seen a move in the World Tour to nasal patches that open your airwaves.
Yeah.
Do we differentiate breathing between nasal breathing and mouth breathing, or what's going on between those two, or is it just collectively we're calling it breathing?
No, there's a number of benefits to nasal breathing. The least obvious, but one that's not talked about that most is the fact that there are sensors in your nasal patches that actually help incorporate diaphragmatic breathing. So as air flows through your nasal passages, you actually stimulate the opposite hemidiaphragm. So if you breathe in through your right nostril, you'll actually stimulate the left hemidiaphragm. When you breathe in through the right, it stimulates the opposite one. So there's better diaphragmatic involvement with nasal breathing than mouth breathing. And that's probably the biggest effect of the nasal patches. Is it just opens up airways and allows a bigger space for air to get in. And some of these athletes are breathing such massive volumes that it's actually their mouths aren't big enough to move the air. So that opening up the nasal passages actually, and it also bronchodilates some of the smaller airways. So the number of benefits to nasal breathing, and those patches help just make a little bit more space for air to move through.
Yeah, I've had a broken nose since I was a kid playing football, and like I had it fixed, but I don't think the surgeon done a very good job of fixing it. I find the patches really change my
Yes.
level of breath, like significantly.
And what you can do if you have access to a device. I'm also involved with a Canadian company called VO2 Master, which allows for us to measure tidal volumes and respiratory frequency as well as oxygen consumption in real time. And you can
Oh, that's cool.
actually put a mask on, and you can actually see someone's tidal volumes change, the volume that they breathe with each breath. You can actually see them change when they start incorporating nasal breathing into their breathing patterns.
Here's one for you. You can dispel this as some idle gossip or based in science. I've heard whispers, I'll call them words around the campfire, that if you
Yep.
look at Jumbo Visma's infection rate this year, it's gone up relative to previous years with the nasal breathing strips and apparently shaving their nostril hair to get even more in. And I was wondering, like, is nostril hair like a natural filtration and now there's more
It
bacteria getting in?
absolutely is. It absolutely is. So I won't comment on whether shaving nasal hair will increase your risk for infection, but it is absolutely, nasal hair is absolutely a filter, and it's a filter for viruses, and it's covered in mucus to pick up little bits of debris. So it filters dust, it filters smoke, it filters viruses, it filters bacteria. So yeah, don't get rid of your nasal hair. Yeah.
My uncle with good bushy nasal hair will be happy to hear that. Never been sick in his life.
Yeah, no, the nasal passages are very complicated inside, and so they're covered in mucus, but they're also covered. They have a very thin layer of cells that are rich in blood flow, and so it actually warms and smooths the airflow as you breathe in. So one of the breathing patterns that we teach to improve performance is to slow the breathing down and use less frequency, so slower breathing but bigger volumes. And if you do that through your nose, that airflow is much smoother and causes less irritation. So when listeners of yours are riding really hard and they lose their control of their breathing, which everybody does at maximum intensity, everybody loses control. They go
Yeah.
from a rhythmic breathing pattern to a dysfunctional hyper breathing pattern. And that irritation, a lot of people will feel afterwards, after their workout or their race is done, they feel this kind of ground glass feeling in their lungs where it just feels irritated. And that's the turbulence of airflow that people get. And
If you've ridden in the velodrome, you'll experience that a lot. I think we just call them
yeah, and
velodrome love.
anybody who's gone all out in any effort at some point has felt that feeling of being, oh my God, I can't move enough air anymore. And it causes irritation. And that's what is diagnosed as exercise-induced asthma in people who it happens at a lower intensity. And exercise-induced asthma really is just a dysfunctional breathing pattern. There's almost nobody that has an actual problem with their lungs. They have a problem with breathing. And if they just slow their breathing down and control breathing through their nose, they would eliminate the symptoms of the irritation and tightness that happens with asthma.
So I would say almost no athletes that I know are currently siloing and focusing on respiratory training separate to their actual training. If someone is to listening to the podcast right now is to buy into this and they're to start protocols, which we'll get onto in a little bit, what sort of gains can an athlete realistically expect across, the key metrics that cyclists love, like VO2
Yeah.
max improvements, threshold improvements, sprint improvements, or
So
endurance improvements?
everybody that we've ever, all of our team members use breathing training in their past. We didn't train anybody who didn't use respiratory training. So we have this cohort of people that we train for years that have really good breathing patterns and have bigger volumes, and the respiratory system is no longer a limitation to their performance. So the only way, there's lots of studies that now coming out. The most recent one is Thomas Kowalski, published out of Poland, did a bunch of research in short track speed skaters, cross country skiers, swimmers. All of them have shown improvement in performance, and it depends on what your performance level is. The most interesting one we saw this year was from France. Was Cyril Ritchie was using our device for 48 weeks. So he did a 1-year study, and he was using pro cyclists. So they're at the top of their game. They improved their breathing dynamics by 8 to 9%. So their tidal volume, their biggest breath that they could take, they improved it by 10%. So they went from an enormous lung volumes of 6.5, 7 liters up to 7.7 liters. And when you take someone who's an adult training at a high level, you think there's no way we're going to improve their respiratory system. They actually improved the volumes. They improved their ability to move that air. But the fascinating thing is they improved their FTP by 6%.
Interesting. That's huge for a pro.
At a pro level. And
Yeah.
so, and that was on average. And he had 20 athletes in this cohort. So when you say no one's using breathing training, there are people using it. They're just not telling anybody that they're using it. So there were at least 10 athletes at the tour that were using our device that had shown a 6% improvement in their FTP in the 48 weeks leading up to the Tour de France.
Sepp Kuss is one of them. I know it. He just looks like he's nose breathing on climbs.
So it's funny because I actually don't know who they are, because they're not coached by us. They're coached by this brilliant French guy who unfortunately doesn't speak English, and my French is, I haven't spoken French since high school, so I don't speak enough French. So I'm having to read through his study, and he's openly published his results with the names redacted. Yeah. But the study, I mean, so
what sort of protocols were these guys doing?
My answer would be 6 to 10%.
Okay, you got my attention. What sort of protocols are these guys doing for this?
Yeah, and he published the protocol. So he, over a 48 week, he actually did. He addressed all the different areas of respiratory management. So the first 6 weeks was learning how to breathe, how to incorporate your diaphragm, how to slow breathe using nasal breathing, how to incorporate different patterns at different intensities. That was the first 6 weeks. The second 6 weeks, he added a higher level with some coordination training, so a little bit higher respiratory frequency work. Then he added some resistance training to the next 6 weeks. Then he added another version of it into the time trial mode in aero position. And so every 6 weeks, he was developing the program to adapt to the athletes that he was training, till he actually developed athletes that could take big, big breaths and move really, really fast when they needed to, under controlled circumstances, and incorporate as much nasal breathing as he could. And that, in a 40-year period, gave him 6 to 8% of improvements in their FTP.
And is there other biomarkers that are affected by it? Is it noticeable impacts on stuff like heart rate variability?
Heart rate variability is dramatically impacted by your breathing patterns. This is the fascinating thing about everybody thinks they know what heart rate variability is, but they don't understand that if they actually slow their breathing down, their heart rate variability will go up. And that's because as you take a breath in, you're pulling blood into the chest cavity, and that increases venous return back to the heart and causes the heart to stretch more. And the increased stretch of the heart allows the heart to actually contract stronger, because the bigger the stretch, the stronger the heart can contract. And then it doesn't need to take the next beat as big. So there's more variability between beats in the heart because of slow breathing. So the best way to improve your heart variability is to slow your breathing down.
Yeah, I had Marco Altini on the podcast, who's written some of the big papers on heart rate variability, and he kind of went really deep on breathing, and in particular the wrist-based devices that are so popular on heart rate variability, and how he thinks it's just a super bad way to measure it. That it needs to be a conscious moment we're measuring heart rate variability so we can control that breath, because it has such a profound impact on the result.
It's interesting. He's totally right. I don't disagree with him at all. The benefit of the wrist devices, and I was actually talking to a non-athlete friend just on the weekend, who's an ICU doctor, and he's been tracking. He has terrible sleep because he's up in the middle of the night taking care of patients who are sick, and he does a week at a time of these horrible nights where he's taking care of patients all day, all night for 7 days straight. And so for that whole week, his sleep patterns are a disaster. He maybe sleeps 2 or 3 hours a night, and then has a nap in the day to try and be functional, because he's got to still function. But he's been tracking his heart rate variability because his watch tracks it. And while Ancini's right about what happens if you actually want a specific number, to watch the trend is fascinating for this guy. His heart rate variability just drops through the week, and his sleep scores are atrocious as well, obviously. But his heart rate variability tracks his sleep almost exactly the same, and his heart rate variability slowly recovers for the week after, gets to some normal level 2 or 3 weeks after his bad week of work, and then he's back at work again. And so you can actually track his fatigue and his cardiac fatigue from these terrible nights of sleep.
What do the Giro d'Italia, Stage Slayer, Mads Pedersen and half the professional peloton have in common? Well, they're all turning to Nomio, the natural performance enhancer proven to reduce lactate buildup during intense efforts. In the 2025 Giro d'Italia, Pedersen's form was undeniable. The Danish star surged to 4-stage victories. This was a major leap in form from his previous season, and a key part of this preparation and performance was Nomio. Developed by the same researchers who discovered the performance power of dietary nitrate. You know those beetroot shots that half the peloton were using? Nomio is clinically proven to lower lactate levels, reduce oxidative stress, improve training adaptations, and deliver a noticeable boost from the very first time you take it. Riders are reporting bigger threshold power, fresher legs mid-race, and quicker recovery, all from a formula made with just 3 natural ingredients: broccoli sprouts, lemon, and sugar. Whether you're racing at the front or you're smashing local segments, Nomio helps you get more out of every ride. Take it before key sessions or races for an immediate edge, or take your training to the next level and get more out of your hard work. Go to drinknomio.com, that's Nomio, and check out this game-changing supplement. Details are in the episode show notes or description down below.
Do you think we're at I'm thinking back when I got my first power meter, it was probably 2007, 2008. And almost nobody had a power meter then. I've told this story a million times in the podcast of how expensive it was, and, telling my bank that it was a car to go to university and blowing the whole budget on a power meter. Do you think respiratory analysis, this whole field will become as popular as the power meter has become? And where are we in that life cycle?
Yeah, as soon as we make it, it's just like, I would actually compare it more to a heart rate monitor, where nobody wore a heart rate monitor because it's impossible to measure heart. You had to have 6 leads and it was all wires and stuff. As soon as Polar came out with a strap that you could put around and you could actually accurately measure your heart rate, everyone's like, well, I should probably know what my heart rate is when I'm running. Now, nobody rides a bike or runs without a heart rate monitor. They don't know how to use it. And most people don't use their heart rate. They just have it. They collect the data, but they don't actually use it. 20 years ago, we had a strap that incorporated breathing patterns as well as heart rate. It was called before time where it was called a bioharness. It was a New Zealand company, and we used that, and because we were interested in how people breathe. And so as soon as the heart rate straps start incorporating breathing patterns into it, and there are a number that are doing that now. Timeware is one of those companies, but there's a number of companies doing it, and it's not rocket science to measure how big the chest is moving and how often it's moving. So you can get the breathing patterns very quickly, and there are 3 or 4 companies that are doing that now. And I think everybody will be looking at their breathing patterns in a few years because it'll just be part of what their heart rate straps show them. And I think very similar to heart rate, there'll be a small number of people that use that data to direct their training and accurately use it. Or I think AI is going to help as well, but people are going to start seeing that there are changes that happen beneficially by adapting the training to what they see on their screen. Yeah. And it's like they do with wattage. They should be doing it I think people should be doing it more with heart rate and with breathing, because that's the physiologic change versus what your power output is. On a good day, if you can ride 300 watts, you'll have a different heart rate than you will on a bad day, and those are 2 different physiologic effects. So the training needs to adapt to how your body is responding to it.
It takes us a little bit of time even to catch up on the vocabulary on it, because we're so used to, LT1, LT2, that now to move to VT1, VT2, there's a new understanding and new vocabulary and new conversations that have to happen. And maybe like the carbohydrate movement has had in the last few years since Sam Impey's Fuel for the Work Required paper, it's been this slow movement towards actually fueling the demands of the work. Now to the point where people don't realize that sometimes they're inhibiting their performance because they just keep pushing more and more carbohydrates. Like I'm talking to guys who are doing 200 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And then I talked to a physiologist for Tudor, Podlacar, and he explained it to me with a lovely analogy. It's like when you're coming off the toll booth and there's like 14 toll booths and they all merge into 2 lanes of traffic. It's like there's a backlog. And that's exactly what happens when we go too heavy on carbohydrate intake. And I think it's a lot of this stuff just needs time to play out and us to have those conversations for it to become into common usage and parlance.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And companies like Timeware are making it more accessible. And as soon as they make it affordable and easy to use is exactly our whole argument from the beginning. And that's why the device that we use to help people train is quite inexpensive, because it really is partly a teaching tool and partly a training tool. But the idea was to make it affordable enough that anybody can use it to help adapt and help understand their breathing so that they can incorporate it into their regular lives and not take hours and hours and hours to do what they will benefit them in the short term, but also in the long term, because breathing health is a big part of this too. And helping people breathe better is the physiological effects of longevity. There's a ton of studies that come out this year talking about VO2 as being the best predictor for longevity. A sub-study of that showed that the ventilation, how you breathe, had even a greater prediction of longevity, which is a fascinating. So how much you can breathe, the total volume of breath that you can move, and that comes down to 2 things: how big your respiratory system is and how fast you can move it, the coordination of it.
Because I often wonder with those VO2 recommendations to give, like, oh, the higher your VO2, the longer you're going to live. But like, I'm even think about myself. Like, you can game that VO2 system super easy because it's so predicated on body weight. Like, I'm a much healthier person at 80 kilograms than I am at 68 kilograms. My VO2 max looks very, very different at 68 kilograms and 80 kilograms.
Yeah, most scientists will not use a weight-based VO2. They'll use an absolute.
Totally,
VO2. Yeah,
makes sense.
They'll show you as mils of oxygen per minute, and they'll remove the kilograms from it. So most of those studies are being published not per kilogram, but they're just doing it total volume. But you're right. Your VO2, if you're healthy at 80 kilograms, healthier at 80 kilograms than you were at 68, your VO2 is likely higher. Total.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you would have had a more impressive number if you divided by your kilograms when you were lighter. But your absolute VO2 would be better if you've stayed healthy. And it's
like your wattage, and like I could probably put out more wattage now than ever. But what's per kilogram? A very different equation.
And I think we were talking just before the podcast about I had the opportunity to ride with Sven Tuff the other day, who's a big boy. I mean, he's famous for sitting on the front of a Peloton for 200K and just pulling it along at 400 watts. I mean, the guy is an absolute incredible. But we were climbing up a hill, and I mean, he hasn't lost a lot. I mean, he's lost a lot compared to his pro days, but he is an unbelievable physiologic beast to be able to ride up the hills that we were riding up. We were riding up gravel climbs at 20%, and it took everything my power to keep my wheels on the ground, and he was just pedaling beside me like it was. And he must have been doing 500 watts.
That's what you get when you tow your dog on a trailer all over the country onto bike races for half a decade.
Yeah, a big dog too. It wasn't a little dog. And there's no places in BC where there's flat roads. There's all mountains around here.
Andrew, I know you're a super busy in-demand guy, so I really do appreciate your time and just shedding some light on this, which I think is a fascinating area. And I think, if you're up for it, we'll go on part 2 and part 3 on this in the weeks and months to come, because I think there's a tailwind behind this breathing respiratory area at the moment, and I think it's just going to, I think like these conversations are important to just start chipping away at the layers and getting deeper and deeper and more nuanced each time.
Absolute pleasure. It was really nice to meet you, and thank you very much for having me on.